going to read and write from files using PHP. So we want to use flat files as a sort of persistent storage so we can save some stuff permanently using files. They're called flat files because there's no real structure associated with them. We have to come up with our own structure. What I'll do is I'll demonstrate two different approaches. So we can either read and write incrementally from the files, line by line, or we can generate our structure with PHP and write the whole thing to the file at once. So before we get started, let's do some design. So what I'd like to do today is some sort of an application that keeps track of students and their grades. So student first name, last name, and a grade. I'm going to do student grades. And how I'd like it to work is every time I load the page, I would like to see the current list of students displayed. So for example, first name, last name, and some grade for every student that I entered into the file. After the list is generated, underneath, I'd like to have a form that allows me to add another student. So maybe I have an input box for first name, an input box for last name, an input box for grade, and a create button. Okay, so those are the two basic functionalities I'd like to support. And eventually, I'd like to be able to clear the whole list of students and maybe do some modifications to individual students in the sense that I can maybe remove one of the entries instead of the whole list. So maybe I can make a link here beside the student and click remove. Okay, so something like that. So we'll start by creating the basic HTML, and we'll incrementally add more and more functionality with PHP. Any questions about the general process before we start coding? Yes?
So we're going to read, we're going to write from the file, and read. I don't understand the process.
Sure. So I'll go through the process. So maybe I'll write it down here. So the steps that I'd like to take every time the page loads is I would first like to read from my file of students and extract all the contents from that file. So the first thing I'd like to do, read students file. Okay. The second thing I would like to do is check to see if the user submitted any information during the last request. So if the user is trying to add a new student, maybe clear the list, or remove a student. So I can do that by inspecting some request arrays, either get or post. So maybe I want to check request parameters. After I've performed any actions that the user asked me to, I want to format the student information that I read from the file. By formatting, I mean maybe display it as an unordered list or an ordered list. Once I formatted the information into some HTML string, I want to inject it into the appropriate container. So display, maybe display student info, and render the rest of the page. So this means the form. Okay? Is that all right? Process? Okay. So let's start by. Is it too small? Let's see. I just want to pause this. Okay, so I've adjusted the screen. Let's start by creating a form. So the first thing I'd like to do before we read from the file, let's maybe create a form that accepts user input just with regular HTML and write to the file first. And then we can talk about reading from the file. So I need a form. Maybe I want to use post for this exercise. And I'd like the form to submit to the current page. So I haven't set the action. So the default action is the current page. Maybe I'll have a label here, new entry. and I need 3 inputs. So I mentioned that I want the student first name, last name, and grade. So let's do an input type is text. Give it a name of fname, and maybe we'll give it a placeholder instead of a label. Okay. And we'll duplicate this 3 times. So I want lname, and the placeholder will be last name. And I want a grade, and the placeholder will be grade. And then I need some sort of input button. Alright, submit button. So input type is submit. We'll give it a value of create. Maybe we'll give it a name of create. Okay, so I'll explain why I gave it a name after. Okay, so it's a bit too wide. Maybe I'll just put these on new lines. So BR, BR. Okay, so here's my form. And what I want to do is write the function that processes the form. Okay. So first of all, if I submit this, let's say I put myself here, I give myself a 80, and I click create. Remember, because I'm using post, I can't see any of the request parameters inside the URL. But just to remind you, if you're trying to debug what's inside the post, what we can do is var dump. So what I'll do is var dump the post. If I refresh the page here, you can see that I have fname, lname, grade, and I also have a create entry there. So the reason I named my input button is maybe I'd like to have, sorry, my submit button, maybe I'd like to have more than one submit button. So based on which one I've clicked, that's the one that gets passed into the request parameter. So maybe later I'll have a clear all submit. Just keep that in mind. Okay, so I'll remove this debugging for now. So what I want to do is create a function that processes the request. So maybe we'll call this function process post. So what it does is it'll check to see if create is inside the post. If it is, I want to add a student to my students array. So what I'll do is if array exists, so which index am I looking for? Create. In which array? Post. Then I want to do something. So here I know that a new student is being created. Okay, at this point, we have to just.
Quick question on that.
Yes.
Can you check on the same spot that you check if the array exists, if it's empty, just for sort of validation? Using the empty keyboard, I mean, does the same thing, right?
Yes.
So
You mean?
So if you have left any of the input boxes empty, it's going to display an error message or something.
You can, yes. So I'm checking to see if the user clicked create, and then inside here I can perform some validation.
Okay, and you can't do it on the same line, that's what I was thinking.
You can.
So check if array key exists and if it's not empty.
Yes, you can. You can.
It's going to work the same way, right?
So how it will work is there's something called short circuiting. So if you put an AND here, so another condition, and the first condition is false, and every joining is an AND, it'll stop checking.
Yeah.
Because for AND to be true, they all have to be true.
Okay.
So as soon as you encounter one false with AND, it won't check the rest of the conditions. So you can do that. It's
or you can use nested.
Or you can nest it. Yeah, it's personal preference, how you like it to look. Okay, so before I continue, let's discuss how we're going to deal with these files and how we can, what representation we'll keep of the students. So I mentioned that the files are flat files. They have no structure. We have to come up with our own structure so that when we write stuff to the file, when we read it back, we'll be able to distinguish what's a first name, what's a last name, what's a grade, and between each record. So usually what we do is for between each record inside the file, there's a new line. So /r/n on Windows or /n on Unix systems. Or you can just use the constant PHP EOL, which is set by PHP, so that will give you the right end of line. So if I draw, so each of my student records will be on one line in the text file. So that means every time I write a student record, I want to make sure that I write a new line at the end of the student record. Okay? And now I have different fields inside my student record. So I have first name, last name, and grade. So usually what we do is we put some sort of delimiter. Delimiter means something that separates the text, something that's uncommon. For example, 3 pipes, or like a pipe and a star and a pipe. Something that you wouldn't find normally inside text. And you can use some array functions to split those apart into an array. So we did something similar in JavaScript last year, where we used a delimiter and we turned a string into an array of objects. Sorry, into an array of strings. So what I'd like to do is write stuff using this format, and when I read stuff from the file, I want to generate an array of students with PHP that I can refer to later, so a global array. Okay. So what I'm going to do here, in this case, I'm getting the information from the post array. So I'm going to create the student. So if you want to perform some validation on your students, you can validate there. So check to see if the first name is blank, last name is blank, or the grade is blank. I won't do that since we did it last week. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new student array. And we'll just assume that everything that the user entered is correct. So we'll say student at the first index, we'll push a value onto the array, equals post at fname. Student at the second index of the array is post at lname. And student at the last index of the array would be the grade. So post grade. Okay. So now I have the student locally. Maybe I have some global array of students. So here I'm going to put students equals array. So I'll initialize it at the very beginning. And what I'm going to do is add this student to my global array of students. So students, this is my global array, equals student. What do I have to do if I'm referencing a global variable?
Global student.
I need the global keyword, right? So I want to say that inside this function, every time I reference students, it's the global address, so it'll refer to this array. Okay, so now what I've done is, I've created a method that will read the post and add a new student to a student's array. This is all still with PHP. There's no files involved yet. Okay, so what we'll do is let's add the logic to display the students inside the students array before we test this guy. So maybe I'll call this function format students. So let's write another function here. Format students.
Unit start students, line 6.
Sorry?
And line 6, global students. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so format students. So what this function will do is it'll read the global students array. And it'll generate an unordered list. Maybe I can write some comments here. That might be a bit easier. So formats, this is the global. Into an ordered list. Okay. So what do I need to do? I need to create a string that represents an ordered list. Okay, so I've seen a lot of people trying to, or using JavaScript to create DOM elements. So here what we'll do is, we'll just create an HTML string, and then later we'll put it into the DOM somewhere. So we'll start with, by creating our student list. So it's just going to be OL, ordered list, and we're going to terminate this with the closing tag. So we're going to use dot equals to terminate it. And then what we have to do is iterate through all the students. We're going to use a PHP for each loop, like we did last week. So our array that we're iterating over is called students. The iterator variable, let's say stu or student. So for each one of these students inside the students array, what we want to do is append to our string that we're creating, student list dot equals. So each one of them is going to be a list item, and we'll eventually close the list item. And here what we want to do is read the first entry, the second entry, and the last entry. So we've agreed that the first entry is the first name, the second entry is the last name, and the third entry is the grade in each one of the students. So here I'm going to do stu at 0. That's the first entry of the array. Maybe we'll add a space between the first and last name. stu1 for the last name. So remember, dot concatenates strings. And maybe we'll do a colon for the grade. Dot stu2. Okay. So maybe I'll expand this so you can see what it says. So what we're doing is we're creating a string that starts with an ordered list tag for every student inside of our students array. So this is basically, students is an array of arrays. So each entry is an array that has 3 entries. Entry 0 corresponds to the first name, entry 1 corresponds to the last name, entry 2 corresponds to grade. So we're constructing this string. When we're finished, we should return our student list. Okay, so whenever we want to call this, whenever we want to create an unordered list of all the students we have, we should call this function and echo the results. Yes?
Let's say you have 100 students.
Yes.
You're not going to hard code them, right? The way you did at index 0, 1, and 2. Are you going to hard code them one by one? Indexes? I think there should be a way to use a loop to loop through those indexes.
You can, yes. Yes, you can do that.
No, he's not, because he's doing
So
0,
this is
1, and 2. He's hard coding them.
no. So this is for each of the students, but these
Okay.
are the student parameters. So this is first name, last name, grade.
Oh, okay. So,
But you're right. I could also create a loop to go through here.
okay, so in that case, if you have many parameters, yes.
Yes,
Then
you can
you're
do that
gonna
as
use
well.
something. Okay.
You just have to determine how you
Separate
create a
them?
separator.
Yeah, okay.
If it's always the same, then you can just write another loop. So to demonstrate, if I wanted to write another loop, I would get rid of this. I would close this line, and I can say for each stu as s, for example, and then I would say student list dot equals s, and maybe a space between each one. Okay, and then I would put student list equals this here. Okay, that's how I would do it with another nested loop. But let's just do it. Let's just do it this way for now. Okay, so here I'm generating an HTML string. So let's go back to our HTML. Remember, these are functions. So here I'm just defining the behavior, but I haven't called them yet. So let's go back to our HTML. I'm going to create a section above my form. Create a div tag. We'll give it an ID of students. Maybe I want to style these differently later. Okay. Maybe I'll put a horizontal line. Yes. Yeah, I can use a class. I can show you how to do that as well. So we can do a class of students, that's fine. So what I want to do here, I'll open up a PHP tag, and what I want to do is call these functions that I've defined. So I want to process the post every time. Process post will only do something at the moment if create is set in the post. So what we want to do is we want to call process post. Okay, remember, if I'm creating a student, it'll add it to my global students array. And then what I want to do is format the students array. So here what I can do is, before I call format students array, maybe I want to check how many students are inside that array. So I can do that using count. So So maybe I can put some logic into here. If count of students is greater than 0. So if I have a student in the student array, then what I can do is call echo, and the function is called format students. Else, maybe I just want to put no students. Okay, so what this will do is, in this location, I'll either echo out an unordered list or the string no students. Okay, let's add a maybe h1 tag here and say student list. Okay, so let's go back to my page. I'll refresh it one more time. Syntax error on line 8.
Key.
Sorry?
The word key is missing. Array key exists.
Thank you. Okay, so I have no students currently. Let's check the post-processing. So let's make John Doe with a grade of 80. So if I create this student, I now have a student in my students array, but it's not persistent. If I refresh the page again, there's no students. So at the moment, I'm just processing the post parameters. So test, test, test. Okay, so what I want to do now is, after I call this process post parameter, I also want to write any of the changes into the file, or into a file. Okay, so how should I do this? So what we can do is we'll write another function inside my PHP script. Maybe we'll call this one append student. I'll write it down here. So function append student. Okay, so what this function will do, I'll write a comment. So this one takes a student array as an argument and appends it to a student file. So I need a student here. So I guess the best place to call this is if someone is creating a student. So what we're going to do is here, after I check to see if the student exists and I add him to the local array, what I'm going to do is call append student. And I'm going to pass in the student that I just created. Okay? So what this function will do is it'll open a file for appending. So I think you went over the methods of opening files in the lecture, yes? Okay. No.
Very briefly.
Very briefly.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are a few different ways. The ones that we'll talk about today are for reading, writing, and appending. So for reading, you open the file if it exists, and you put the cursor at the beginning of the file, and you can only read from the file. That's an R. For writing, you put the cursor at the beginning of the file, and you truncate the file if it exists. So if you open it with a W flag, it erases everything in the file. For appending, A, you want to write to the file. So it puts the cursor at the end of the file, though. It's different from write, and it doesn't truncate the file. It just puts it at the end, and it tries to create it if it doesn't exist. So what we can do is we'll call fopen. Fopen returns a file pointer. So I'll just save it as $fp. And we open our file name. So let's create a file name that's in the same directory as our PHP script. And we're going to be using this file name over and over again. So why don't we define a constant that refers to our file name. So let's define, maybe we'll call this stu file. And we'll agree on what the file name should be, maybe studentlist.txt. Okay, so I've defined a constant stu file. So now whenever I want to refer to this student list, I just use this constant. And this is a good practice because later if you want to change the file, you just have to change it in one spot here. And everywhere else refers to that file. So here I've defined the constant. Let's go here. So fopen takes two arguments, the file name that I'd like to open and which method I'm opening for. So here stu file is my constant, and we're going to do it for A. Okay, and fopen can succeed or fail. So we can check to see if it succeeded, so it returns a true value, then we'll do some stuff. Else it failed. So here, let's just do die for now. So die stops the execution of the script. Cannot open file for appending. Okay, so what do we want to do now? What we want to do is create the format that we were talking about. So put a pipe between each record of our student, or a bunch of pipes or something weird, and write this to the file. So there are two functions that we're going to use a lot today. One of them is called implode. So implode turns an array into a string with some glue in between each of the indices. Explode turns a string into an array. So if I have, for example, if this is my array, so this is one array with 3 entries, and I have, for example, John, Smith, and 75. So here's my array, index 0, 1, 2. If I want to implode this into a string, I can pass a delimiter, let's say 3 pipes. Go change it to John, 3 pipes, Smith, 3 pipes, 75. Okay, and I can go back and forth. It's a little confusing there. I can go back and forth using implode or explode. So what I'm going to do is use fwrite. So this is how we write to the files incrementally. So what I want to do is, you have to pass in the file pointer that you're writing to fwrite. So I just opened the file. The file fopen opens a file pointer, which is a descriptor that describes which file I'm using and how I'm using it. So here I'm going to write to this file that I just opened. What am I going to write? The contents is going to be this student that was just passed in, but I want to write it as a string. So I'm going to say implode. Okay, and see, I have 2 arguments for implode. The first one is the glue. So what do I put between each array index? Let's say 3 pipes. You can do anything you like, any delimiter. And the pieces, which is the array student. Okay. I also mentioned that I wanted to have a new line for between every record. So I'm using 2 delimiters, 3 pipes and a new line. So after I implode this, it becomes a string. So I want to append PHP end of line.
Could you use the /n?
I was going to ask that.
I could. So I could use /n. On Windows, it's /r/n.
Yeah, both of them.
So on Unix or Mac, it's /n. So PHP EOL is defined based on the operating system. So this way your script will work everywhere. So it's a constant. You should always make sure after you open a file, you close the file. So fclose. Which file am I closing? FP. You use the file pointer. And that's it. Okay. So what we want to do is, like I said, sorry?
Do you need to create the file now?
Right. So this will try to create the file for us.
So it generates itself.
Yeah. So if you open a file for appending and it doesn't exist, it tries to create the file. So there may be a permission issue. Let's hope not. So let's see. Let's open a directory here. If I go to C, XAMPP, htdocs, COMP2144. So no file there yet. Let's go back to our page. So at the moment there are no students. Let's try to add John Doe 75. Let's try to create this guy. Okay, so I've created the student. Hopefully it's created a file as well. There's my student list.txt. So I've successfully created a file. If I edit this with Notepad++, you see that I have John Doe 75. There's a new line after it because you see line 2. So I'm okay. Okay, so I can add another student. Let's say Jane Doe, John's sister. She's a bit smarter. I've added it. But now notice that I only have 1 student appearing in my students array. So what do I need to do now?
Right from the text list, text file back into here.
Yeah, so I need to read from the text file using PHP. Sorry. So let's go back to my script. Okay, so I can write to the text file. I can format my array of students, but I haven't been reading from the text file yet. So now The question is, should I read first and then change, or change first and then read? So I think what we should do is read first. Okay, so let's write a function that reads from the text file. So again, we'll do the reads incrementally. So let's write a function. Maybe this will be called read students. Get students is better probably. Get students. Okay, so what this will do, let me write the comment first. Okay, so reads the students file if it exists and populates the global students array. Maybe I'll put this on the same line here. Okay, so what I want to do is first check to see if the file exists. If it exists, I want to read from it, and we'll read from it line by line, and we'll take the contents of our text file and do the reverse formatting that we did when we wrote to the file. So what I can do is, there's a function called file exists, which tells you whether or not a file exists. So we can call this function on our student's file. So if stu file exists, then we should try to read from it. Okay, so first check to see if file exists.
Or can we do with fopen with the read switch?
I'm not sure if read will try to create the file.
Not to read it if it's there or not. To do instead of file exists.
Because it returns false, right? That's why it means.
So what's your suggestion? To
Like for example, we do a different fopen, like the file name, and then the read for the switch R. And then if it exists, continue, not die the comment as well.
we can do that as well.
Sure.
Yes.
I also did that a different way. I used file to turn it into an array.
Okay. There are many different ways. I'll demonstrate another way after this that we can do everything in one shot.
Is that a good way, or is that a way
Yes.
to not do it? Or?
It's all personal preference. So they both work equally well. When I finish with this example,
Yeah.
I'll show you another way where I can just do it all in one shot.
I was on the right path.
Yeah. Okay, so I check to see if the file exists. If it does, what I'm going to do is open the file for reading. fp equals fopen stu file for reading.
This is what I'm actually.
And then and then you check to see if you can open it or not. Yeah, sure. So if fp is successful, we want to do some stuff. Else, let's die here and say cannot open file for reading. Okay, and here what I want to do is read the files line by line. So I want to have some sort of incremental string. So I'm reading, I'll show you what I mean.
Yes.
I'm reading the files line by line using fgetS. So I'm going to have a while loop. So verbally, what I want to do is, while I can still read from the file, while it doesn't return false, keep reading. So it's going to look a little strange. So what I'm going to do is, while line equals fgetS, so this reads a line from the file. Which file? The file described by this fp. So inside the while loop, I want to set the value of line and continue while it doesn't equal false.
Is this reading line by line or?
Yes, this will read line by line. So this is a shortcut way. So this is a quick way of doing something like this. So instead of setting the line inside the while loop condition, what I can do is just say while line, set line inside the loop, and set it the first time outside the loop. Okay, so the reason I did it this way is because I think it looks a bit cleaner. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm reading the first line, checking to see if the line is there. If it is, I'm going to do some stuff, then read the next line and continue iterating. Alternatively, what you can do is read the line, save it to a variable, and check to see if the result of line, the result of this function, is false. So we'll return false when there's nothing more to read. Yes?
This is better.
Sorry?
This is better because understand what the syntax, because the other way is difficult.
So, like I said, there are many different ways to approach this. So if you like this better, you can use this way. But the other way is also an option. And what I'll do is, each time I read a line, so there's two things I need to do. Each time I read a line, that's one record. So I have to explode those into an array. And I can add those into my students array. So let's get our global students array. So anytime I refer to students, it's global. And what I want to do is students, I want to push the value of line, but I want to explode the line. Which delimiter am I using? So the same delimiter I used to implode the line. So explode returns an array. So I'm putting an array into this array for every line that I do. And I think that's it. When we're done, we should close the file pointer. Okay, any questions?
Can we use like parameters or switch for add cats? I used 1024, meaning that one line, like
The maximum is, you can if you want to, but it's optional. So you can limit how big the line is. But here we know the lines are going to be very small.
Okay, so you don't need to specify that.
Yeah, it's an optional parameter. So let's, we should call this function. Where should we call this function? So here it is. What we want to do, maybe before we call process post, we want to call read students. Okay, if you look at the steps that I wrote over there. So let's call get students first. So here it is. We're going to call get students. This will read the file and add students into a global students array. Then we'll call process post. If process post wants to add a student to the array, we'll add a student to the array from the post, and then we'll open the file for appending and add this student to the end of the file. So here's append student. Okay, so we have both conditions covered. And then we'll format the students if they said something. So let's see what happens. I'm just going to refresh the page without submitting anything. No students. Forgot to save. Let's try again. Okay. So here I'm reading both students, John Doe and Jane Doe, successfully being displayed. If I want to add another student, say Homer Simpson just passed. And if I go here, yes, I have Homer Simpson there.
So what's the reading first or the...
So the steps are, let's go over the code. The steps are, I first read all the students inside my students file.
And then create, okay.
Yeah, for every student in the student file, I add it to my global array of students. So I have an internal representation of what I'm working with. Once this is done, I check the post. If I'm adding a new student, I'll first add this new student to my global students array because I want to display the students later. And after, I'll write this new student to the file. So here's append student. And then I call format students. Okay?
What's going to happen if you click create a new one without submitting anything?
So I'm not doing any validation. It'll just create a blank
Any
student.
Okay. Using the delimited.
There might also be an error now if I try to read the file. Oh, I guess not. Let's look at how the file looks. There you go. So I was worried that they wouldn't have the 3 pipes. But it has no string, 3 pipes, no string, 3 pipes, and a new line. So I can modify this file manually.
But you wouldn't have to worry about it if you had validation, right?
Sorry?
If you had validation, you wouldn't have to worry about it.
Yeah, so you would probably need to validate this as well.
Can you summarize the steps so that it's easy for us to...
So they're right here. So read the file, read the student file, check the request, format the information into a string, display the information, and render the rest of the page. So these are the summary of the steps.
Yeah, I was talking about the code.
Oh, the code?
The code is a little bit...
Sure. Okay, so I'll go through the code. Okay, so what happens when I refresh the page? So let's say I request the page without submitting any request parameters. PHP starts going through the page. I get to here, getStudents is a function that reads my student file line by line. For each line, it turns a string into an array and adds it to an array of students. When it's finished reading that file, it closes the file pointer to that file. Done. Next function I call is processPost. Here I check to see if the user is submitting any new information. So in this case, a new student. If there's a new student, I can tell because create is submitted in the post. I read the first name, last name, and grade into a new student array, and I append that new student array into my global array of students. Then I call append student with this array that I've just created, which will write this new student to the end of my student list, which is here. So it just writes one record. Make sure that you write an end of line at the end, and it closes the file. When that's done, I check to see how many students I have. If there are more than one student, the count of students would be greater than 0, would be 1. Then I call format students. So what this does, format students, is it reads the global students array. For each student, it creates a list item inside of an ordered list, returns the string, the HTML string, and what I do is I echo out this string in this position of the page, so inside my div tag. If there are no students, I just write no students. Okay?
Remember what we were talking about earlier about making it to a specific div that's already created?
Yes.
I had issues doing that with PHP.
So I'm doing it right here. So here's the div tag. And what I've done is I've just created an HTML string, here in format students.
So you kept adding it to students to...
Yeah, so I start with an OL tag. Maybe I'll show you the source. So if I view page source, so here I just start with an OL tag.
And it'll work for the same with the table, same thing.
Yeah, it'll work for a table as well, yeah.
Because the thing is, I was actually generating my table UL with PHP, but to get it into a specific div tag.
Just put an echo statement with the HTML.
With the string.
Yes.
Inside that div tag.
That's right.
So whenever there's something in there, it'll do it all. I don't have to call that echo at all. It's always running in the background.
You have to call the function if it's a function, but you should echo out the string. So somehow you need to get an HTML string and echo it out into the page.
Can I see the div where you echoed it?
Yeah, right here. So here's the div, and I echo right
Is it
there.
a function?
Yes. So I call the function, which creates the string, and I echo out the result. Okay. Let's add some more functionality. Are there any other questions? Let's add some more functionality. Yes? What's your question?
No, something else.
Okay, so do you have any questions about this? No. Okay. Yes?
Can you save this before you make it more complex and then we can look at it in stages?
Yeah, sure. So I can save this to a separate file?
Yeah.
So what I want to do now is I want to have the ability to clear all the students. So you tell me, what do I need to do if I want to get rid of all the students?
You need
Right over top.
open it and override.
Yeah, so you're all saying the right thing. So I just have to erase all the students. So let's mimic erasing all the students by just
done this part already.
deleting the text files and refreshing the page. No students. Okay, so how do I do that with PHP? So maybe here I'll create another input box. So we'll make a submit button. Type is submit. We'll give it a value of clear. And we'll give it a name of clear. I don't know. So here it is. So now what we want to do is, if I see clear inside the post, I should clear the list. So let's go to my, there was a request to make this a new page. Let's do that. So I'm going to save this as week 13, let's say B. Okay, so here's my clear button. So what I want to do is inside my process post, I want to do else if array key exists, this time clear inside the post. Then I want to do something. So here what I want to do is clear the student's file. Student's file. Okay, so just to convince you that this does work, I'm going to var dump the post parameters here. Maybe we'll do an echo PRE. And we'll close the PRE. Okay, so the post should appear at the above here. So if I do John Doe test and I click create, wrong URL. Let's go back to B. So if I do Jane Doe test and I click create, so here's my post array. Create is set, so are all the other parameters. If I click clear, create is no longer set, but clear is. Okay, so I can look for that if I want to have different actions in the same form. Okay, so let's go back to week 13. So I'm checking to see if clear is set. If it is set, I want to do two things. So I want to clear my students array. So students equals array. So we're just going to clear that. And we want to somehow clear the contents of my file. So what I can do is file, there's a function called file put contents, which performs the opening, the writing, and the closing all in one shot. So the arguments to file put contents are which file, and what do I want to put into the file? Just an empty string.
So basically this does writing.
Yeah, so this
It doesn't append. It just
doesn't append. That's
So
right.
the right file append with the
You can add an append flag. Let's look it up. You can add an append flag to file put contents,
that will append.
and I think that will append. But if you don't put a flag, here are the flags. So if the file name does not exist, the file is created. Otherwise, the file is overwritten. The existing file is overwritten unless the file append flag is set.
Yes.
So you can append if you want to, but we didn't set the append flag.
So can we discern that one? Because when we do it, it will be one line on the text file.
Sorry?
It's empty. It's going to be existing one line empty in there. And if we're going to read and we post after, it's going to be one line at the beginning, which is empty.
Let's try.
You need to try /r/n.
Okay.
Put contents.
So let's see if that's true. Okay, so what we want to do is we're going to try to...
But myself, I said like keep it empty, and I did like to remove it when I show it.
Let's see what happens. So here's my student list. And what I'm going to do is clear the contents. Let's check my student file. So it's empty.
Yes, we have.
If I refresh the page, no
Okay,
students.
if we have now one more record in there.
Add one record.
Yeah, it's going to be one line empty in there at the beginning. Or no, so there is another line after actually, so line 2.
No, but there should be a new line because the new line
One
set.
erase,
No, you don't have to erase them. So the new line separates one record from another. So you should have the new line between them.
I had on one the new line, but when I create the array, I want to read something, it will show me the new line at the beginning. But I got rid of the new line, but when I work with the create or delete one of the items, I have to specify like if it's empty, do not read with it, and I go like -1 +1 with the arrays.
You can use trim to get rid of new lines and check the length. Trim is a function, yeah. Maybe we'll use that in a second. Okay, so I have the ability to clear the list. Okay, what if I wanted to erase just a single entry?
Single entry.
So
let's
let's add a bunch of test information. So let's add John Doe 78. Let's add Jane Doe 35. This is bothering me a little bit. Okay, so here what I'm going to do is create a script tag. So what I want to do is on page load, I want the focus to be set to that container so I can just quickly write information. So we can do window.onload, or we can just do something like this. So this is an immediately executing function. So document dot query selector. So I want to select input that has the name of fname, and I want to focus.
Is that JavaScript or?
That's JavaScript. JavaScript. So what I want to do, there we go. So now I can just quickly create, for example, John Smith, and I can keep writing. So Jason Holmes, 89. Okay, good. So I have this list. So what do I need to do if I want to erase just one student?
So going with the array, delete the first record and then go right back to the array.
Yes. So good. So what I should do is internally in my internal representation of my students, I should remove whatever I want to remove and then write that whole array back into the file. Okay? So I need to write another method. Maybe we can call this one write students instead of append students. So here, let's call this one write students. So here it is. So what this function will do is it'll write the whole array to the specific file. So what we're going to do is we're going to truncate the file by opening it for writing, and then just go one by one through the array and write to the file. So we'll call this one function write students. So what we want to do now is use the global array. So if the count of students is greater than 0, so if I have at least one entry, I'm going to write the students. Else, the students array is empty anyway, so I'm just going to write file put contents. Student file empty string. Okay, so we did that here as well. So we did it here. If the student array is empty, we just write file put contents with empty string. So we're doing the same thing here. If the student array is empty, we'll just write file put contents. Otherwise, what we're going to do is we're going to open up the file for writing. Which file? Stu file. What are we going to open it for? Writing. So again, this will put the cursor at the beginning of the file and truncate it if it exists. Then we should check to see if the file pointer was returned successfully. We want to do some stuff. Else, let's put a die here. Cannot open file for writing. Okay, if this is the case, what we want to do is for each entry inside my students array, STU, we want to write it to my file. So remember, there's a specific format that we have to write. So let's do fwrite. Which file pointer am I writing to? FP. Which format? So what I want to do is implode using this glue, this array, STU. So it looks very similar to this guy. And make sure you add an end of line. Okay, and this is where we might get into some trouble. So you mentioned that we might have some extra end of lines. So when we read the file from the students, we might have some end of line files inside here. If that's the case, we're going to have to trim what we write out. But let's check to see in a sec. So what we want to do is for each student, we want to write the imploded version with the end of line. And we want to make sure that we close the file after we're done. Okay, I think that's all right. So now, how do we trigger this condition? Writing students. So let's go back. So what I want to do is somehow let the user choose which student to erase. Maybe I can have a link here. So suggestions from you. How can I do this? Which, yes?
The way I did it was, they were like, I just had a text box where I could just enter the number to change that.
The number of the line. Right?
Yeah.
Number of the line. Okay, so what does the number of the line refer to?
The index.
The index of the array, right?
Can you do it also? Sorry. You
Yeah.
pointed here.
Go ahead, that's
Sorry. Can you also use have buttons or something that
Yes.
say delete or?
You can. So I'll make a link
But
to do it.
this is going to be more complex, right? Or not? I did the same thing with the box, grabbing the line, which I find easy.
So I'll show you how to do it.
Yeah. Returns more post array, right?
So instead of using post, I'm going to use a link that passes a query string using get, and I'll check for get
Also, you
inside
won't make
my.
it the bottom, you'll make it an AH, right?
Yeah, a link. Yeah. You can do it any way you like. The point is,
with the loop. I said with the loop, like if you write a name and you write a loop, the name it says like compare the string, get the value.
that's a good approach. So you're checking one of the entries, right?
Yeah, one of the entries.
So the problem with this one is if I have two Johns, like I do on number 2 and 4,
Yeah.
if I check the first name, it'll get rid of
First
both.
one, the
First
second-
and last one. Yeah, you can do that. Okay, so this is how I'm going to approach it. So what I want to do is I want to pass the index of the array. So indices start at 0. So let's change this ordered list so it matches our array a bit more closely. So inside my format students function, I'm going to start with the number 0. So this is an HTML property. Start equals 0. Okay, if I go back to my page here, so this matches my indices a bit better. And what I'll do is I'll add a link after each one of my students that'll pass a query string at the end of my URL. Then I'll listen for the query string. So here is the function I need to change. After each one of these students, I want to put an A tag. I don't know what the href is quite yet, but I want it to say remove, for example. Okay, let's just see if that works. So here I have a bunch of remove links. And what I want to do is add a specific query string to this guy. So what I can do is I can just put the query string, one entry in the query string, for example, which ID I want to remove. So I can say remove equals, and then I want to refer to the index of the array. So I can do this inside the for each loop. In the for each, you can use the value of the array, but also the index. So index value. Okay, so using this syntax, I have access to the index of the array as well as the value. This is also useful for associative arrays.
It's
Yes?
the same thing if I did, because I used a 4 in my mind. It's the same thing. I did use, put the index, the x would be like x or I.
That's right, yeah. So here what I'm going to do is href remove equals. So here I put the value that I'm looking for. So I'm going to terminate this first string, concatenate it to this guy, and here I just want to put index. Okay, let's see if that works. So if I mouse over, you can see at the bottom it says remove equals 0, remove equals 1. So it matches the index of my array. If I click on this, I'm not listening for anything yet. Here's the remove equals 0. Here's the remove equals 4. Okay, so now what I have to do is listen for this change. How do I do that? So inside my process post function, maybe I should change this to process request, because I'm now processing get parameters as well. I'm going to check to see else if array key exists. Which array key am I looking for? Remove. Okay, so here I'm looking for remove. Where? This time inside the get array. And these should be mutually exclusive events. So I shouldn't have the get array set at the same time as the post array. So that's why I put it as an else if. Okay, if this is the case, I should validate the remove index. So I want to check to see if it's numeric. So first let's get it. So remove equals get remove. Okay, what I want to do is do some validation. So if it's numeric, remove. What else do I need to check? Remove should be greater than or equal to 0. That's where my indices start. And it should be less than something.
Less than the length of the array.
Yes. So the length of my students array. Okay, those are the 3 conditions that need to be met for me to use it properly. If that is the case, what I can do is just unset students at,
Should it be less than equal?
sorry?
Should it be less than or equal?
It should just be less than, because we start at 0.
There is
So
one already, yeah.
if the count is 1, then there's just one index, which is 0.
Yeah. So makes sense, yeah.
Okay, so now we unset the array. And what can we do at this point? I've unset the array.
At that index.
Which function should I call now?
You need to write again the rest, right?
So I need to write again the rest. So which function do I have that writes everything to the file?
It's student. No.
Append student adds 1.
And write student.
Right.
Write student adds all of them, right?
Yeah.
So I should call write students. So let's go back here. And I'm going to call write students. It's a function. Okay, what I can do is I can even change this guy to write students. Because if my array is empty, write students will do the same thing.
Should be empty.
It'll just write an empty string. Okay, so let's see if that works. So I'm going to remove this query string syntax on 47.
That's the, should be
Oh, it's
close.
just-
Maybe.
No, it's good. I'm just missing a bracket there. Aha, and I changed the name of this function to process request, so I should change where I call it here. Instead of process post, I want to process the request. Okay, so let's look at my text file. Here it is. So formatting looks okay. If I remove one guy, let's say Jane Doe, let's look at my students list file. So remember I mentioned that I have a bunch of extra end of file or end of line
That's
tags.
what I was talking.
So this is what you were mentioning. So I have a bunch of empty records here. So what I need to do is, either when I'm reading from the file or writing to the file, I have to get rid of all the extra end of line tags. So what I can do is, here's my code. Whoops. Okay, so let's go back here. Here's my code. When I'm writing in write students, here I'm going to use trim. So what trim does is it gets rid of any extra space to the right or to the left of the string, including new lines. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to clear my text box. Let's open it here. So here's my student list. It's empty. Let's add Jane Doe. Let's add John Doe. Let's add Steve Smith. Okay, so I have a bunch of students here. Now if I remove one of the students, John Doe for example, I still have some issues. So let's see what I have here. Undefined variable index on line 50. But I fixed the original issue that I talked about. Let's go to line 50. Here it is.
The index should be removed.
Yes, thank you. Should be removed. Okay, so let's go back here and try it one more time. So if I want to remove John Doe, I've removed John Doe. If I want to add him again, create, and I can remove Jane Doe, for example. And she's gone from my file.
The only question was for the link when you put the href, that question mark, then can you just explain that?
Yeah, sure.
So
So here it is.
Yes, that's the one. What
So-
does that mean exactly?
The question mark is just a query string. So what I'm doing is I'm appending.
PHP that one or?
Whoops, try to right click here. So what I'm doing is the href, this is the HTML, it's just a question mark followed by the query string. If I don't have a URL there, it just appends the query string to the current URL. So I could have, for example, written week13b.php question mark, then the remove. So for example, if I go here, I could have written week13b.php, then question mark, then remove. But this way, it'll work on any page.
Okay, so that means after it.
After the current URL.
The attribute. The attribute is that, right?
That's right. Add this query string to the end.
It's saying it's a PHP function.
No, this is an HTML href. So notice when I mouse over here, it says the whole path, the current path, and it adds the query string.
It's a shortcut, right?
Yeah, so it adds question mark remove to the current URL. So here, if I get rid of this guy, when I click on this, it will add question mark remove equals 0 to the top of this URL. Here we go. Okay? Okay, any questions about this process? So this is the incremental process of incrementally writing and reading from files. So what I'll do is I'll make one more version and just show you quickly how to do it all in one shot, and then we'll call it a day. Okay. So I'm going to copy this file, create a new one. We'll save it as week13c.php. Okay, so what I want to do in this one is instead of reading and writing incrementally from the file, we just want to read all in one shot. So let's start with reading, get students. So what we're doing here is we're reading line by line. For each line we explode with this delimiter and pass it to the students array. Another way to do it is to use file get contents. So what file get contents does is it opens the file for reading, reads all the contents, and closes the file in one shot. So what I'm going to do is just put it here. So we'll say raw students equals file get contents. Which file am I?
If you use file get content, does it return only like a string, right?
That's right. So what do I want to read to file? This is my constant here. So this is my raw students. So what I need to do now is
explode downward to an array as well.
Good. So let's call this one student pieces. So what I need to do is call explode. What am I exploding on? Which delimiter?
The raw students.
Sorry?
The raw students string.
Okay, that's what I'm exploding. But what delimiter should I?
Oh, okay. Space or
Yes, someone said it. The new line. Remember, the records are separated by new line first. So I want to explode by the new line. So this will give me an array of student records that are separated by pipes. Now what I want to do is iterate over each one of these and explode that again into my students array. So we'll do a for each. So for each student pieces as piece, let's say as SP for example. So what I want to do is to students, I want to append the result of exploding using this delimiter on this piece. That's it. So it's similar to here. This line and this line are very similar. Difference is that instead of reading line by line in this while loop, I just read everything in one shot and got all the pieces using this. So now I don't need any of this stuff. So that's how it looks if I just read the file in one shot. Okay, I'll post both of these so you can have a look at the differences. Okay, let's see if our solution is still working. So let's go to week3c.php. So it's not. Let's look at our student list. So let's make sure that everything is reading correctly. Let's clear the list. Okay, so I just want to make sure that everything's all right, and let's start from here. So test, test, test. So line 56. So this looks okay. Let's go to line 56 and see what the issue could be. So here's 56. So 0, 1, and 2. 0, 1, and 2. And the error is undefined index. So this might be what you were talking about with the extra line here. So let's see what we can do here. So maybe we have to change how we...
The explode should not be maybe starting with the PHP, just space. Or
So I think it should be like this. So we should explode by the end of line.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe what we should do is
So it's trying to read the second index, and there's nothing.
it looks like
second
I'm
index,
reading the first one
But then it's trying to read the
as
second
empty.
one.
So what I should do is here. Maybe I should check to see, like you said, the size of this guy. So I want to see if the strlen, so the string length of the result of trimming sp is greater than, let's say, 0. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that I'm not just, so here it looks like I'm just reading an empty new line. There's nothing there. So here what I'm doing is I'm trimming it. So I'm getting rid of the new line or any other extra space, and I'm reading the length of this string. If it's greater than 0, if there's something there, then I want to add it to my students list. So let's try that. Oops. If I save it, and try that. So we're okay. Okay, so this works. So let's do Jane Doe 77. So I'm going to create, and I can still remove. Okay, let me close this guy. Okay, so now what we can do is we can modify the other files. Here, let's go to write students. So what we're going to do is we'll do this one in one shot as well. Instead of using fwrite, we'll do file put contents. So how we can do this in one shot is we have to generate our string of students first. So here,
Question,
yes.
so when would you have to use the other, one or the other? Right?
So it's personal preference. If the file sizes are small and you feel like you can generate all your contents quickly, then you can use file put contents. If you're writing a giant file, then you would use the iterative approach.
Oh, okay, so you're just going.
Yeah, so it depends how big your lines and how big memory is. But if you know that you're doing something quick,
Okay, so
you just want to regenerate the whole file every time, you can use file put contents.
Okay, that's what I want.
So what we're going to do here is we'll create a student string, and we'll just incrementally add to the student string. So how we're going to do this is we'll do for each students as st. Okay, and it's going to look very similar to this line here. So we're going to say student string equals, what I want to do is implode using this delimiter each student record, and I want to add the end of line to each time I iterate, and just like here I'm going to trim it as well. So notice, even though these are different methods, the formatting looks very similar. It's just a question of whether you write the whole thing. This looks almost the same. Instead of writing it, I'm just saving it to a string. When I'm finished, file, put contents, stu file, and I want to put the student string. Okay, and then I can get rid of all this file pointer stuff here. Okay, is there anywhere else that we do incrementally? The append students. So what I can do now, let's just make sure I have no typos before I continue. So I do have a typo, line 80.
It's
You need two equals, huh?
you need the dollar sign.
So 82 now. Good. So let's test, create. Okay, so this works. Okay, so now because I'm writing everything in one shot, I can just overwrite every time. Instead of appending to the file in this stage, whenever I have, so here I called append student, but here what write student does is it reads my student array and writes everything to the file and overwrites it. So what I can do is I can even get rid of append student if I wanted to. So here's append student. I can get rid of this function append student. It might not be as efficient, but what I can do is just call write students instead. So what I do is, every time the page is reset, if there's a change, I write the whole thing to the file based on my internal representation of the students. So let's check one more time. So what we're going to do is add Jason Smith 88, create John Doe 88, create. Oh, did I click clear or create there? Let's see what's going on with my file. Okay, so let's try this. So I seem to be overwriting all of my entries there. Okay, so let's see what's going on.
Yeah, okay.
Drop down line, enter line.
Here it is. Whoops.
Should be the append instead of the right.
Okay, so I have write students, and write students.
Because the file put that's right.
That's right.
You need to append. You need to write
yeah.
the
Put a file at the end.
file
At the end.
append at the end of
The flag.
But I'm writing all of my students, not just one of them. So I think this should work.
But
So for each one of my students,
it will override each content because we're doing the loop for each, right? And each time every record it will be overwritten in there.
no, the loop is over here. So it loops and constructs the string, and then I write the string to the file.
Is this string being written the whole at the same time or one?
Yeah, let's do some debugging. I'm going to check to make sure that my student string is being generated correctly. Oh. Yeah, let's do that. So here's not being called. Let's add John Doe 123 88. So here I'm just writing one of my students. So there must be a logical error somewhere. So instead of going through all of my students, I only have one of them, specifically the last one that I just added. So let's look at here. I'm adding the students, I'm calling write students. Get students, process request. So here's the problem. Nope, I have it here. Students.
Yeah, that's the one. Concatenation, I think.
So it looks like I'm not reading them correctly. Okay, let's pause this for a second. Right. Okay, so we found the error. I missed a dot inside my write students function. So there should be a dot equals here instead of equals. Okay, so that was a very long one. Any questions? I'll post all this on GBLearn. And there's an exercise that you have to do that's very similar to this, creating a to-do list.
We've done already now, we're on the bonus question.
Yeah, so I won't show you how to do the bonus, obviously. So that's up to you. Actually, let me stop.